Greetings, everyone. I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion. The streak continues, and this time it's the first of several rematches that are on this list. It is The Undertaker vs. Kane 2, Electric Boogaloo, which took place in March of 2004 in front of over 18,000 people in Madison Square Garden at WrestleMania 20. Before I watched the match, and I still have this opinion even after revisiting it, this match does have nostalgic value for me, and that's because this was the first WrestleMania that I watched live. Obviously, I wasn't in the building. Couldn't afford to go all the way across the country to watch a wrestling pay-per-view. And now I could probably not even afford it as an adolescent. No. But I watched it on pay-per-view using a lot of my birthday money to buy the pay-per-view. And I don't have it on hand. I actually still do have my copy of the VHS that I recorded of the pay-per-view. And over the years, I would watch it a lot. It's been a couple years since I've watched the entire pay-per-view. But one of these days, I'll probably watch through it and give my thoughts on how I feel the pay-per-view is. See if it's held up. Probably a couple parts are probably going to be a little bittersweet because of what's happened in the intervening years, but that's another video. This match went on right before the main event, which is one of the aforementioned bittersweet moments. And it went for a little under 8 minutes. Closer to 10 if you count entrances. The build-up for this match goes all the way back to Survivor Series 03, where Undertaker took on Vince McMahon in a Buried Alive match. The genesis for that match was that Vince had interfered in Taker's No Mercy title match against Brock Lesnar, a biker chain match, which that's a match I needed to really go back and watch because other than the whole concussion fiasco from a future WrestleMania match, Taker and Lesnar usually have good chemistry when they're wrestling together. I mean, their Hell in a Cell match is one of my favorite matches from the first year I started watching wrestling, and when I went back and revisited it, it still holds up. And I didn't actually prefer Lesnar as a heel than as a face, even though I think his late 02 to early 03 face run was okay. It's just, that's his biggest flaw as a face, but I thought he did alright. But I'm getting off topic. Vince interfered. Taker wanted his revenge. Because if there's one thing you never do, you never interfere in a match that Taker's involved in and not expect him to want your head on a platter. And I haven't watched that match, but from how I remember them recapping it, Taker beat the crap out of Vince, was about to win, and then Kane interferes and buries The Undertaker alive. And how they recap this in the video package, I just love the way it's edited, the way they make the footage black and white. The laughing children singing Ring Around the Rosie as Kane is like lifting up the dirt and like laughing maniacally. You can say what you want about them unmasking Kane. If there's one advantage to it is you actually get to see his facials a lot more. I mean, with that half mask, you could kind of from below. But just seeing all of his facial expressions as he's lifting the dirt, he'd have to really exaggerate his body language in order to do that with the mask. But with this, you see him like stereotypical evil, but it works for Kane with how he is during this heel run, where you can definitely tell there's something wrong with him up here. Then that following week on SmackDown, he came and did the eulogy for The Undertaker, giving the reason why he buried him alive, and that was, and here were his words, "The Undertaker committed the most unpardonable of all sins. He betrayed himself." Which, if you think about it, is a heavy sin to commit. And it makes sense in storyline. Because Undertaker started out as, the mortician, the rest in peace figure. And then he turned into the American Badass, and as Kane elaborated, he became one of you. He became the type of character that every man can identify with. You rode motorcycles, wore bandanas, got tattoos, he was married, he had a kid. In that feud I mentioned, Lesnar did something weird in front of Taker's wife, and she was pregnant at the time, and Heyman even brought it up in promos, like, "Where's your head, Taker? Are we in it?" So you can identify with him. You'd want to go kick Lesnar's butt if he did that, if he humiliated you in front of your wife. Kane, other than a few things during that last babyface run before they unmasked him, he didn't really become like an everyman type character like Taker did. So it's logical that Kane, when he's a heel again, will go after his brother for this, because he's like, you betrayed what we, as the Brothers of Destruction, stand for, and now you're going to pay for it. So he's buried alive. Things were alright until the Royal Rumble, when Kane is going on a tear, Taker's music plays, and he gets eliminated. And then he beats the crap out of Spike Dudley, who was coming out next. Now, over the next month or so, every now and then, Taker would play mind games with Kane. The two that come to mind are 1 week when Kane was going to do his flames up from the turnbuckles. It takes a couple times for them to go off. And then the other one is during his match with Goldberg. After Goldberg hit the spear, the ring starts shaking, smoke starts coming out, and then Goldberg's like, forget this, and gets the heck out of there. Probably for the best, because you're not going to have Goldberg lose to Kane going into his match against Lesnar, and kind of would take a little bit of the shine off Kane to have him lose to Goldberg on free TV. So that's one of those instances where it's a non-finish, where it's like, all right. And as they show in the video package, as Kane said, for weeks you've been sending signs of your return, but it's going to take much more than this to intimidate me. And then, of course, the way Kane says this next one really does sum up how he is. I am not afraid of you! Where he's frustrated, annoyed, and even though he's saying he's not afraid, you can tell he's starting to get a little intimidated by his brother. I mean, Kane plays mind games, but his older brother plays better mind games. It's one of those things like, younger brother, I'll show you how it's really done. And then we get to the match. The entrance, I do love the entrances for both Kane and Taker. Like, Kane's, we'll start with, he comes out and the city backdrop's on fire, and I love the way King sells this on commentary. My God, JR, the whole city's burning! Kane comes down, waiting, lights go out, and then the crowd goes wild as soon as they hear, oh, yes! And even me, at this point in my fandom, when I originally watched this match, I hadn't gone back and watched a lot of the past Undertaker, Kane stuff, but I knew enough to know who that was the moment I heard it. And I went wild as an adolescent watching this, because out comes Paul Bearer leading the Druids with the urn in tow. And you can tell, if you watch his previous appearance in there, that Paul has gained a little bit of weight. And that ties into how they were able to bring Paul Bearer back, and that was agreeing to pay for his gastric bypass surgery. Now, my memory of the timeline's a little fuzzy, so I don't remember if they had done the surgery before this pay-per-view or they did it in the months afterwards. But Paul wasn't around very long after this. He would go away following the infamous Concrete Crypt match, which I'll talk about that match one of these days later on, maybe when I review that pay-per-view, or maybe start reviewing Taker's years. That'd be an interesting little thing to go through. I just love how Paul sets the stage before Taker comes out. Once he gets to the ring, this nice little bit of continuity where he looks at Kane, and you hear it on the camera, he goes, "You're no son of mine!" Nice little reference to the fact that Kane in kayfabe is Paul Bearer's son, because Paul got busy with the Undertaker's mommy. And then out comes Taker to his classic theme with the classic trench coat and hat, and we get the classic Undertaker entrance, complete with lights go on, the white eyes, hat comes off, white eyes. The whole time Kane's like, "No, you're dead, you're dead." You can tell the frustration and anger are welling up as he's watching his brother come out. And Taker's gear, at this point underneath the trench coat and all that, is still mostly his American Badass gear. As the years would go on, he'd kind of modify it a bit to where it'd be more of a mesh. But here it's still mostly American Badass, just minus the bandana. And by this point, he had let his hair grow out a little bit more than what it was during the Buried Alive match. It kind of looks like he might have dyed it a bit, but I think it's just whatever he has in his hair and the lighting that makes it look a little bit darker. And of course, he's got that eyeliner around his eyes again, going with the whole Deadman persona. And then the bell rings. Now, of their two Mania matches, I will say their first one is better, but because that was their first meeting. And since then, they've been allies, they've been enemies, they've been allies, they've been enemies, and even since this match, they've been off and on again. who could forget years later, around 2010, the whole Kane finding his brother in a vegetative state thing, which led to 1,000 different memes. But for this one, this is an okay match. Unlike the match from 19, this actually feels like it belongs on WrestleMania. But I'm not so sure it belongs this late in the card. I think the reason it's this late in the card is because it's the Brothers of Destruction colliding again, and it's Taker returning to his Deadman persona. And it goes with the whole theme of the pay-per-view, where it all begins again. I think this probably would have made more sense to have around the middle of the card, but then it's like, what do you put in its place? Do you put the Lesnar-Goldberg match in its place? Oh, God. Can you imagine if that had been the match going before the triple threat? They might have been still down when that match happened, and they would have had to pace the beginning differently, but with Shawn involved in that one, they probably would have been able to. But this one, they went a little less than 8 minutes, so they do what they have to do. The in-ring work is actually pretty good. I mean, from the beginning, you know, once Kane goes and actually touches Taker, he goes at him like you would expect someone would. Hey, someone buries you alive, you're going to go and beat the crap out of him, too. He goes at him, punches. At one point, the referee's trying to get Taker to back off. Taker just turns around, does a little lunge thing, like, hey, and the referee backs off. As one would when a near 7-foot tall guy who's beating the crap out of another almost 7-foot tall guy lunges at you and you're a lot smaller than he is. At one point they go to the outside. Taker throws Kane against the side. They go back inside the ring. You see a lot of their classic spots. Kane at one point does his flying clothesline. Taker goes for old school, but it gets countered. Later in the match, Kane does manage a chokeslam on his brother. And instead of going for the pin, he starts posturing and like, look at your Undertaker now! Look at your Undertaker now! Which is stupid on his part, but he's a gloating heel at this point. And he's basically like, I'm finally going to get rid of my older brother. And he's doing the whole postulating thing. So this is his version of getting caught in monologuing, to use a trope. He turns around, and I just love the timing of this and how Kane sells it when he realizes it. As he's turning with his gloat, Taker sets up and looks at him, and Kane goes from to the frustration and worry on his face. The match goes from there, and as I mentioned at the beginning, Taker gets the win in the end. He gives Kane a chokeslam of his own, and then he gets him into the tombstone for the win. Now, I'm fine with Kane losing to Taker here. The one thing I'm kind of conflicted on, and this is more from a grand scheme continuity thing, the first match it took 3 tombstones. This one it only took 1. Now, you can kind of go with the argument in the intervening years, just like how Undertaker became more quote-unquote human. Kane kind of has to. He's still a monster, but he's not like that indestructible Michael Myers type character he was before, where it's like, nothing can stop him. Whereas here, it just took 1. Or you could also argue that he's probably still a little, that frustration and all the emotions combined with the tombstone or what beat him. Or, of course, as Bruce Prichard would probably say, you're trying to apply logic to an illogical situation. Brett Vince probably just going, I just want tombstone. It probably would have made more sense for Taker to at least pick him up and give him a second one just for good measure, but that's just me, you know, booking retroactively years afterwards, but I don't mind it. It's just one of my little nitpicks about the ending of the match. But anyway, after Taker gets to 3, we get the classic Undertaker celebration where he does the pose with the blue light coming down, Paul Bearer and the Druid celebrating with him. And of course they would come out later in the week on SmackDown. And we'd see them together for a while until Taker went into that feud with the Dudleys and Paul Heyman, which eventually led to the aforementioned Concrete Crypt match. All in all, this was a pretty good match. It's not the best entry on the streak. It's a step up from the previous one. It's not as good as the 2 before that. But compared to one we're going to see in 2, from what I remember, it's not going to be as good. But I think the match that's coming up next is a little bit better. Even if it doesn't have the full-on history with it. The fact that it's past versus present and the characters involved, I think, make it a better match.